My name is Vanessa French. I'm the Associate University Librarian for Library Access and Collection Management at Lehigh University. And this presentation is about our recent FOLIO to Banner integration to streamline invoice payments with our accounts payable department. Okay. Yes, go. Okay. So before we get started, I wanted to talk a little bit about what we were doing before so you get an understanding of why we implemented this integration. So prior to the integration, our acquisitions team would create an invoice in Folio, and then they would email our administrative services group, ASG, who would then sign the invoices and submit them for payment to the accounts payable department. We would get payment confirmation on transaction detail reports that we were getting somewhat inconsistently, maybe every month, a month and a half. And then while the process was working, we felt like there was certainly some room for improvement. Okay. So what were the main goals of this integration? So primarily, we wanted to create efficiency. In the previous system, there were a lot of emails going back and forth between ASG and the library acquisitions team, so it was challenging to know what had been done by other people. Additionally, there were staffing changes in ASG that made the acquisitions team had to adjust their workflows. So when a new ASG member took over the invoice processing, she preferred to get like a daily list of all the emails, and then there was also confusion about what fund to use for what. So it wasn't the most efficient. So we were looking for a system that would work regardless of staffing changes and would get us out of the dependency on emails. Another inefficient part of our workflow was that the invoice was submitted. After the invoice was submitted, there was little to no feedback until the transaction detail report was received. Yes. God damn it. That means you got to see my notes, which is just extra helpful, right? Yeah. Okay, is that better? Great. Okay. So another inefficient part of the workflow was that after the invoice was submitted, there was little to no feedback until the transaction report was received. So if a vendor contacted us about a late payment, we had to contact the ASG unit to get some information about the status. Additionally, when it came to the fiscal year rollover, we would often receive a transaction detail report a month after the rollover, and it was hard to tell which fiscal year things got charged to, and sometimes they didn't get charged to the one we had hoped it would be. So then... Okay. And then the other thing we were hoping to achieve is reducing errors. So in the previous way, the acquisitions team was creating invoices in Folio, and then ASG was recreating invoices in Banner, and sometimes things would go wrong. The wrong amount would be paid, the wrong fund code would be charged, and that would require us to all have to do things after the fact to resolve the issue. Or again, sometimes it would come out of the wrong fiscal year. So there's just a lot of extra work to try to fix those errors. So before we implemented this integration, we had some specific requirements that we had to meet, we had to include in the integration before we could proceed. So first, our accounts payable office required invoices to be approved for payment by our ASG business manager. In the previous system, that approval was denoted by a signature on the invoice, but it was determined that other methods of denoting the approval would work. It also required that the approval had to go with the invoice itself into Banner. So the approved by function in Folio wouldn't be sufficient because that approved note in Folio didn't get transmitted to Banner with the invoice. So from a process standpoint, we also needed a way to correct human errors in Folio so that our budget information in Folio would match reality. And I think that's pretty much, I think any system needs to be able to fix it if you screw up, essentially. Okay, so we needed a way to bypass the integration also. Okay, so what does our new integration look like? Okay, before we could implement the integration, we had some prep work to do. First, every fund in Folio needed an external account number that corresponded to the Banner accounts. This ensures that the money is deducted from the correct account once it hits Banner. Luckily, we had just redone our ledger structure like a year before, and that gave us a good opportunity to make sure that external account number was an alias in, or an external account number in every fund. So also, every organization in our Folio environment that we're using as a vendor required a Banner ID, meaning a unique identifier that matched the unique identifier in Banner. And that needed it as an alias in the Folio organization. So this ensures that the payment is issued to the correct entity. We also discussed how to bypass the integration as needed, whether to fix payment issues in Folio or to document things that were paid with procurement cards that didn't need to go through Banner. Ultimately, we decided to bypass using the payment method feature on the invoice. So if the payment method is other or credit card, it doesn't get sent into the Banner integration. So the first step of the workflow is similar to before, where the acquisitions team create an order in Folio, but now they're careful to keep the invoice in an open status while working on the invoice, and only changing it to the reviewed status when it is ready for payment. They're also careful to populate the payment method portion of as credit card or other if they need to bypass the system. Okay. Next, the team member logs into an Illusion workflow document upload utility. The workflow utility makes a Folio API call to populate a drop-down menu of invoices that have a reviewed status in Folio. The acquisition team selects the correct invoice and uploads the PDF of the vendor invoice that has been provided. The utility will then send the invoice to the ASG business manager for approval. So that's how we're getting to that approval step that was required. After the invoice is approved in the workflow utility, the Illusion workflow makes another Folio API call to add both the PDF of the invoice and a PDF of the log of the approval saying this person approved this invoice at this time that will accompany the PDF of the actual invoice into Banner, thus again getting to that approval aspect that our accounts payable required. Then that same business manager will log into Folio and changes the invoice status in Folio from reviewed to approved. Okay. At 6 p.m. every day, an API call checks for invoices in the approved status and then submits them to Banner. Okay. A few minutes after 6 p.m. every day, the acquisition team members get a summary email of all the invoices submitted to Banner and whether they were successful or not. If there are invoices with errors, corrections can be made in Folio and it'll try again at 6 p.m. the next day. If the invoice submission is successful, the invoice status will be changed from approved to paid, and it will write the Banner invoice number into a notes field in Folio. Okay. So after we started this implementation, there were a few adjustments that needed to be made. Okay, so first, one adjustment that we needed to do is increase the capacity of the number of invoice line items that were being submitted. The initial implementation had only 10 line items that were submitted at a time, and it turned out that went really bad really quickly. So our developers made some changes and adjusted the upper limit to 250, which should be above our biggest EBSCO journal renewal invoice. Additionally, we developed a process to get LIN IDs into we developed a process to get LIN IDs created for new vendors. So we did a lot of work, like I said, in the pre-implementation to add LIN IDs to our organizations in the Folio app that we have consistently paid for years. But anytime we decide to buy something new from someone we've never purchased before, for the integration to work, we will need a LIN ID. And the previous method of getting the LIN ID was saying, here's an invoice, go pay it. And that was the creation. So we had to add an extra step where we submit information to accounts payable for them to generate a LIN ID for us to create the folio organization to then submit the invoice for payment. There were also some adjustments in the human workflow. So now our acquisitions members need to check the organization entries in Folio to confirm the presence of a LIN ID. While we did prep work looking for this before the integration, we've had a few duplicate organizations that we basically, when we migrated from our previous system to this one. So for example, we have like 9 different entries for Gobi based on like whether we paid continuations or books or, and we definitely had a LIN ID for at least one of them. But turns out sometimes the wrong organization gets selected and then it pops out an error that there isn't a LIN ID. We've also added the step of uploading the invoice to the document utility to the approval that we didn't previously have, but we've cut out the step of the constant emails. So it's kind of balanced itself out. There's also an additional step of troubleshooting the error messages that didn't exist before. But mostly those have been LIN ID things, and it's just fix the ID and then it goes through the next day. Another workflow adjustment that we made after the implementation was deciding to take wire payments out of the integration because our accounts payable has an additional form that also has to accompany wire payments. So we just decided that we're going to keep the manual process for those for right now. Okay, so now that we've have the implementation up and going, we started this, I would say, end of July. So it's been a few months since we started. There are some improvements that we would like to see. So having more information written from Banner into the Folio invoice after payment would be helpful. So right now, when the invoice is accepted by Banner, it generates a unique Banner invoice number, and that does get written to Folio, but nothing else gets written. So for example, a week later, when accounts payable issues the check, like it would be great if it also wrote the check number. So if a vendor calls me in a week and says, where's our money? We can say a check was issued on Thursday and it's this number. Do you have it? Getting that information still requires actually contacting the administrative services group and requesting it. So the other thing is for the payment method of the invoice, we are populating it with something, but the truth is most of the time we don't know how the payment will be issued, how our accounts payable will decide to how they will decide to issue payment. So it would be great if after the payment is issued, it also updated that drop-down menu with the reality of the situation. Okay, that's it. Yes.
Okay, can you hear me now? Actually, I have dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of questions.
Great.
Part of which is because one of the things on my to-do list is to translate these mod APIs into Edge APIs to make that a little bit easier to manage. So I'm requirements gathering here. My first question is, you're using payment method to determine whether it gets transmitted or not. Mm-hmm. Was there a reason you chose not to examine the export to accounting status?
I'm not sure we were aware of that one.
Yeah, there's a checkbox export to accounting, which is if you're using some alternate transmission to output vouchers, mm-hmm. namely via FTP, Folio looks at that to generate the FTP file. But I was just curious why that wasn't examined for this process.
The only other conversation I remember having is about the status of the invoice itself, and we determined that we couldn't use the status of the invoice because it was impossible to skip the approved step. Like we had already decided that the approved step would be the trigger to send it for the integration to send the invoice. And since it was impossible to go from a reviewed to paid status without skipping that step, that's the reason that wasn't selected. I don't believe we examined the export to external accounting.
Okay. And then my other question is, can Banner generate the check number and the date the check was issued?
They definitely have that information in it, but it doesn't happen until it has happened. Like, I think our accounts payable sends information, like sends checks like once a week, you know?
Right. My question is, does Banner have the capability of outputting that information in a way that we could write for Folio to consume it via API?
I would imagine they do. I would not be the person to ask about that. I think the reason we haven't looked into that so far is because after an invoice gets the paid status, it's challenging to make further edits to it, but I wouldn't be 100% on that one.
I can make those changes.
Great.
No, I'm joking, but
Yeah.
no, this feedback is good because that's a use case for the invoices are paid and approved, but you still want to write in a check number, so we can put that in either as a custom field or some other field. So that's my question is, do I need to add this?
I would also say we'd have to examine what the trigger is for the call to be made, because we don't know when that information will be available. Like for the current method, we have the 6 p.m. trigger every day. It looks for an invoice in the status. It's marking the status as paid after it enters Banner. I don't know if it is in a complete status, if there's a way for it to make another call like 1 week after it's entered the complete status for, that sort of thing. So again, I'm not the API guy.
For any Banner users, Aaron, that would be interesting to know.
Yeah.
Got one question here from the chat, which is there direct information exchange between Folio and Banner, or is this done by exporting a report which gets sent over to Banner regularly? And there's a couple comments from the chat also that I'll read out after. I
believe it's an API call and it goes directly. I don't think there's a middle step of a report that's generated.
Okay. And there's a comment that Cornell uses export to accounting as a trigger to general ledger system. And we have a comment that the University of Chicago is getting the check numbers back from their accounting system via API. It's recorded in the voucher section.
I knew that was possible. My IT guys seem skeptical, but
yeah, and MTSU is manually completing this now. And there's a comment that you can edit the voucher section afterwards, and it would be great if that could be automated.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's it.
Great. Okay. Any other questions?
Could you say a few more words about the Elution workflow step? I tried to do some quick web searches for it, and I can't tell if it's an adjunct to Banner or something separate.
It's a part of Banner. We had initially looked at whether we would use DocuSign for the approval process, and our systems engineering people, I think, abandoned that because the Elution was already included in the Banner suite that we had, so it was less complicated. That's my understanding, but we did initially consider DocuSign because we had in the old way, they were physically signing, or they were, there was an actual signature. Now there's a log of approval, not a signature. But the initial thing we looked at was DocuSign, and the Elution workflow was determined to be the better solution. Yeah. Great. Well, thank you, everyone. Hopefully this wasn't too painful It was a little painful for me, I'm not going to lie.